All right. We'll call this meeting of the Citizens Oversight Committee to order.
All right, we'll take a roll call. Chair Shepler.
Here.
Chair, Board Member Peck.
Here.
Board Member Alexander.
Here.
And Board Member Woody absent. Let's see. Committee member announcements and presentations.
I don't have anything. Does anyone else? Nope.
All right, and then we will turn it over to our acting, Administrative Services Director, Emily Conrad. Our regular Assistant City Manager / Administrative Services Director is on maternity leave. She gave birth to her third boy over the weekend. He's healthy and happy, and family's doing really well. So she'll be out of the office until the end of January. So we're very thankful for Emily to stepping up into this position in the interim. So with that, I'll turn it over to Emily to provide a brief update. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Just a few updates for you today. As you know, the Finance Department has had a lot of personnel changes since June of 2021. And one of our new faces is Liz Douglas here. She'll be taking minutes for the CFAC committee today and going forward. And we have built a strong and productive team, and I'm confident in the work we're doing for the city and our community members. Along with taking minutes for this committee, Liz also processes accounts payable and works on TOT and business license reporting. I wanted to also update you on the loan payoff that we have budgeted for 22-23, partially funded by Measure Q&E dollars. We did make that payoff, and the total payoff amount was $1.2 million. $240,000 of that came from Measure Q&E. Additionally, finance staff is working on closing the books for this fiscal year, 21-22. The audit is scheduled to start on November 14th. And so our goal is to finish closing the books by October 31st in order to give us ample time to provide all the requested documents for the audit. The last update for you is that I wanted to circle back on the subject of the vacant seat on this committee. I know Sarah provided an update at the last meeting. So my update for you today is that the February, May, and July recruitments were unsuccessful, and the recruitment is paused for now. In November, we will begin the recruitment for the scheduled vacancies for advisory bodies terms ending January 31st, as well as any current unscheduled vacancies. And Member Alexander's and Member Peck's terms will be up in January as well, so we will have a total of 3 seats to fill on this committee. And that concludes my update for you today. Do you have any questions?
No, but thank you and welcome, and
Thank you.
good luck filling in.
Thank you.
Just wanted to add one thing on the loan payoff for the fire station. Really appreciate the support of the CFAC on doing that and recommending that to council. It'll save the city $500,000 over what would have been the life of the loan. So tremendous savings to our community. We appreciate it.
All right. Do we have any public comment for items not on the agenda?
Hi, I think that would be me, the public that's here. My name is Helene Finger. I've lived in the county for almost 40 years now, and I own a home on Yerba Buena Street here in Morro Bay. And I'm here to talk about the second largest income source for the city of Morro Bay, the transient occupancy tax. And I'd like to have a conversation now that the new short-term rental ordinance has been in effect for a year around how effective that's been at collecting additional transit occupancy tax for our community, because that could be really substantial. One of the requirements that that ordinance put into effect was that every licensed STR, and I think there's 228 of them, had to bring in a minimum of $500. Yeah, I would like to know how that's progressing, and if the city is, I'd like to know how many of those STRs are contributing that, and what we can do to further promote that source of income, because as I said, it's the second largest and pretty close to the same percentage as our largest source of income. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Staff, do you have any off-the-cuff knowledge or comments that you can respond with?
Yeah, absolutely. And it'd be good to bring this up with City Council as well, as this committee typically focuses primarily on the Measure E and Q sales tax. But generally speaking, the short-term vacation rental ordinance was adopted by the Coastal Commission, approved by the Coastal Commission late last year, basically a year ago. And we just got funding for the position to really kind of orchestrate the new ordinance at the beginning of this fiscal year in July. So we haven't had the benefit of a full year yet running the program. But you're absolutely right. The minimum of $500 was established by council so that we didn't have people just, holding an STR license either to ensure that their neighbor didn't get it or, for a future sale of a home, even though these don't transfer with home ownership changes. So at this point in time, we don't have any clear data because it's only been running for a few months, but absolutely plan to, per council direction, once a full year has lapsed, to report back and see where we're at. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, our first agenda item is the consent calendar, including approval of minutes for the August 16th meeting that we had. Does anybody have any comments or a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve.
Okay,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Our next business item is the informational session on the local taxes. So do we have HDL online?
Yes, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Welcome.
Do you want to announce? Okay.
So we have an informational session for you today presented by Bobby Young from HDL Companies. Bobby, I'll hand it off to you.
Great, Emily. Emily, did you want me to go ahead and share my screen from here?
No, I can run the slides for you. Just let me know when to move forward.
Okay, wonderful. There they are. Okay, I can see the slides. Wonderful. Go ahead and move forward real quick. Just do a quick intro for myself, Bobby Young, Client Services Director here at HDL. I've been with HDL for just about 10 years now. Came out of local government where I had spent the previous 15 years working my way up, inevitably becoming finance director. Some local politics in the city I was living in kind of led me over here to HDL, but I've been in and around local government finance for just about 30 years now. Hopefully my face doesn't show my age too much. Go ahead and go forward. I'll talk a little bit about HDL, who we are. You'll see that we represent over 400 clients here in the state. Oh, sorry, next slide, Emily. There we go. We have well over 400 agencies that we represent here in the state. It's a mix of cities, counties, and special districts, kind of a broad spectrum there. We are blessed to have about a 99% client retention rate. We do everything we can to keep our clients happy. And you can see down the list here, just some bullet points. While I represent and lead the sales tax team of everybody who comes out to meet with our clients, and we follow the local economy, especially with regards to sales tax and consumers and spending and everything there. But we also have services related to property tax revenue that local jurisdictions receive. Also, our sales tax data definitely helps us on the economic development front and kind of helping local jurisdictions either manage certain locations or bring retailers in, kind of promote the local area and encourage more businesses to come in. We also have different functions with regards to business license, TOT, short-term rental, cannabis management, and other local revenue sources that cities receive in, and we're able to help process payment and kind of thereby also back-end audit those local revenues. So to ensure that cities are receiving everything that they should. So it's a little bit about HDL. We've been in business. We're coming up next year will be our 40th year working here in California. We also have satellite offices in different states across the country, which we are continuing to look and take advantage of those opportunities. Next slide for me, Emily. There we go. So today we're going to be talking about sales tax and two pieces of the overall sales tax rate. Here on the screen, you'll see that we've got a total local sales tax rate in Morro Bay of 8.75%. And this is how it breaks down in total. You can see the largest share right at the very top going to the state overall at 3.9%, rounded. The two local sources. So when we talk today, we have to keep in mind that we've got a piece of the base sales tax rate, that which you see there is called the Bradley-Burns. That's a full 1% value. Then we also have, as we all know, Measure E, which is the 1.5% rate that you see there kind of blocked off in red. The other pieces of the overall sales tax rate mostly go to the county and also countywide transportation projects. So you can just kind of get a sense of how it all breaks down. I'll go through a couple of little administrative pieces of kind of Measure E and local transactions and use tax. Emily, if you go ahead and go to the next screen. Just to give us a foundation around which we work and talk about here. So a transactions and use tax, which is Measure E, is also some people call it a district tax. Some people call it an add-on tax, that which you see there on the left side. It is under Revenue and Taxation Code sections there on the right that express the authority of the local agency to put forth the ballot measure, have voters vote on it, and then inevitably approve it. But those are the Revenue and Taxation Code sections that the tax is administered under. And then we start talking about the differences. So Emily, go ahead and go to the next slide. Between the two pieces of the sales tax, you got the local Bradley-Burns 1%, and we have Measure E. The two do not function exactly the same. Now, what you see on the screen here is just some examples of different retailers, especially local retailers, where the two do function very similar, whether it be restaurants, supermarkets, stores, gas stations, over-the-counter type of sales that occur there within Morro Bay. Both Bradley-Burns and Measure E do function very similarly. Then I think on the next slide, I kind of talk a little bit. One real quick, almost a misnomer, if you will, but there's usually when a new measure is adopted, there's concern over, will it have an effect on consumers? And as you see here, just some bullet points of why and how we've looked at data, and we cannot really tell that it does impact local sales activity. Consumers mainly focus on the base cost of an item, not so much the local tax rate. Tends to be a little bit of a hassle if you're shopping around local tax rates, right? And then also there's alternative purchase options that most consumers will consider versus just the local sales tax rate. So, and again, because a local transactions tax works and functions very similar to a Bradley-Burns on those over-the-counter sales, most consumers are not kind of shying away from their purchases. A couple of slides here just to walk through functional differences between the Bradley-Burns and a local transactions tax, especially on registered vehicles, whether that be cars, boats, aircraft, motorcycle, anything that gets registered to a physical location. Now we've got an address attached to that purchase, and that's where transactions use tax law differs from Bradley-Burns. These are just a couple of examples of these next two slides. And I apologize, I didn't pick it up when I sent city staff the slides. Forgot to change the rates here, but just consider that a couple of these rates would be otherwise Morro-based total sales tax rate. So one example of a car, you can see here, buyer lives in a non-transactions use tax city with a total sales tax rate of 7.25%, the absolute statewide lowest rate, and they go to a city that has a local tax rate of 9.25, that which you see on the slide. consider for Morro Bay, even though you don't have necessarily car dealerships. Think of that as the 8.75 we were talking about. The buyer will only pay 7.25%, which is their local rate in the jurisdiction that they live in. Okay? They do not pay the sales tax rate of the city that they're going to on a registered vehicle. Then go ahead and go to the next slide, which is the otherwise next example. Buyer lives in a transactions use tax district. Here on the slide, it says 9.25. Think Morro Bay residents. Their local tax rate is 8.75. They go to a city that has a lower sales tax rate of 8.75. That buyer will pay the 9.25, the tax rate of the jurisdiction they live in. Then the way the tax comes out is the 1% Bradley Burns stays in the city where the car was purchased. Then the transactions use tax goes back to the city where they reside or where the vehicle will be registered. So in the example of a Morro Bay resident, 8.75 locally. If they go to a jurisdiction that may only have a local rate of 7.25%, the 1% Bradley Burns will stay in that city where the car was purchased. But our 1.5% Measure E is going to come back to the city of Morro Bay because your local resident who voted or lives in a jurisdiction where Measure E was voted and approved, that's where the revenue will come back to. So that's how registered vehicles differ and where we might end up seeing them. I'm kind of leading to a slide that's going to really talk through how that affects the overall dollars that are collected from Measure E versus the local Bradley Burns. Then also on the next slide, you'll see we also have things like building supplies, equipment, bulk fuel, others there where when deliveries come into the city from outside, the transactions and use tax, Measure E, will get collected and remitted. Any local businesses that are shipping goods outside of the city, however, Measure E is not collected. Wherever they're shipping the goods to, if they have a local tax, then the merchant will be collecting and remitting for that jurisdiction, not Measure E, right? So those are just some otherwise kind of tangible examples as we walk through and get ready for kind of the dollars and the overall performance of Measure E, how it differs from the city's base sales tax rate. Also on the next slide, you'll see, talk a little bit about internet retailers. Most recently, over the last 3 to 4 years, we've seen change of law, for one. Then obviously the pandemic caused a lot of shoppers to not be able to buy indoors at local merchants, but had to inevitably buy online from retailers. In those cases, Measure E is still collected and remitted. So as I put on here, think Amazon, eBay, Facebook, Wayfair, and a lot of the other major retailers, they absolutely do collect and remit for goods that are shipped into Morro Bay. So we see revenue specifically for Measure E, whereas it's not quite the same on Bradley Burns. Local tax is collected, however, it's distributed to all cities in a little different format, not exactly to the jurisdiction where the goods were shipped. So again, a little functional difference when we're talking about online sales activity. And we do get the question quite a bit, do out-of-towners pay the tax, or can we just make the tax applicable to out-of-towners? It's not obviously the way that transactions use tax law works, but I think most notably for Morro Bay, there is the added benefit because without a doubt, we see the summer seasonal activity where we get a lot of tourism coming into the city, a lot of activity at our local retailers, at our local restaurants, and thereby they do pay Measure E, even though they're not a local resident. And that has everything to do with revenue and taxation law related to those over-the-counter sales or restaurants, gas stations where the merchants are not asking and can't require to know where they came from. So everybody in that case pays Measure E. Go Go ahead and let's go ahead and jump and start looking at the breakdown here of Measure E and where all of Measure E revenue comes from. You can just see it's obviously a pie chart broken down to what we call major industry groups and how we segregate all of the data that we have to be able to piece it apart and really communicate with the city and inevitably with the community about where sales tax dollars come from, in this case, Measure E. And you can see the biggest chunk comes from restaurants and hotels. That's the kind of the darker green section there in the top right. Also, general consumer goods in the blue, just below that, about 18%. And then surprisingly enough, as you kind of make your way around in more of the neon green section there in the bottom left, you'll see 14% of Measure E comes from autos and transportation. And that has so much to do with the example I was talking about before, where it does not matter where Morro Bay residents go to buy a car. The city may not receive the local 1% Bradley Burns because we don't have very many car dealerships in town, but the city will receive Measure E revenue related to that purchase. So go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll get, and I apologize, Emily, go ahead and walk through this one kind of slow. There's a lot of numbers on the page, so let me talk through these and really then show those dollars and how they're different. So here on the left side of the screen, you see those major industry groups. Now we're putting numbers to it and making otherwise the tangible dollars really highlight here. We most recently, we, HDL, on behalf of the city, received the second quarter sales activity. That was the April, May, June time period. That is, even as Miss Emily had mentioned earlier, the city is looking to close its financial records. That's the end of the fiscal year for sales tax data. And we see at the bottom line here, we total of 4.6 million received from Measure E in fiscal year 21-22. Largest sector of that revenue is restaurants and hotels, you can see at the very top, and also general consumer goods. Go ahead and click one time, there, Emily. And we'll compare that to what the city received on the Bradley Burns side there on the right. You can see a total of 2.5 million for the fiscal year. And Emily, if you click one time, it'll bring in, and what we're showing here is a ratio of just above 1.8%. Now we know that Measure E has a sales tax rate of 1.5%. And if it was straight, everything that came in for Bradley Burns would be the same on Measure E. We would expect this ratio to be 1.5. But because of those dynamic differences in how transactions use tax law differs from Bradley Burns, we end up with a greater ratio. This tells us as HDL, and we try to communicate it to the city. As we know, there are a lot of folks that come in from out of town, especially during the tourist season. We've got folks from Morro Bay buying vehicles, and I'll kind of walk through. We've got a couple of those pieces coming up here. But it really speaks to how transactions use tax law is different than Bradley Burns. If I can click one time, we'll walk through a couple of sectors here. Most notably with general consumer goods, and especially those right there on the bay. General consumer goods on the Bradley Burns side brought in $272,000, whereas on Measure E, that vaulted up to $845,000. Within our data, we have two pieces here that are really affecting it. When it comes to the Bradley Burns, that which you see on the right, reminder, internet sales and internet sales activity that Morro Bay residents buy and have shipped in, on Bradley Burns, it functions a little bit differently. So it comes into the state and county pool allocation, that which you see up there at $419,000. A good majority of that is online sales activity with a few other pieces rolled in. Where over on Measure E, we get it directly from all the major or all the online retailers, right? They'll collect and remit the 1.5% Measure E. So that's really where we see, a big difference overall, and we can tangibly assess it through the data. Go ahead and click one more time, and this red line that you see come in here will really highlight the difference on autos transportation. Bradley Burns on the right side only brings in 65,000, as we know. A lot of new and used car dealerships there within Morro Bay, forcing the residents to go outside to buy cars. They will pay, and Measure E gets collected, and you can see for fiscal year 21-22, $625,000 came in from autos transportation. Big chunk of that from new and used car dealerships. Then the last two pieces, and again, those shipments that go out of the city and come in, go ahead and click one time here. You'll see a little green bar pop up. Building, construction, and business and industry. And on the right, really reflecting just the local businesses within those two categories that make sales. Over on the left under Measure E, we see those relate not just to those local merchants, but also any goods that get shipped into the city. Think building, construction, suppliers, and contractors here as so many properties get renovated, goods get shipped in. We end up seeing that revenue over on the Measure E side. So that was kind of a big unload, and I apologize for so much of the details and the numbers, but it is what we do, having so much data available. With all that data, go ahead and go one next slide here. Measure E information and the availability of information. So where to get economic information as it relates to the trends. You can see, obviously, the last bullet point here on the left is just a picture of the newsletter that, as a service to two cities that we provide, is a non-confidential write-up about the local economy. What are some of the trends that we saw? We get data on a quarterly basis because that's the frequency when local businesses need to remit sales tax to the state. So by that function, we can only get data as soon as quarterly when all those tax returns get filed. So that's kind of how we put it all together. And then I mentioned the newsletter is non-confidential. So another piece of revenue and taxation law is this understanding and definition of confidentiality. The purpose of it is no single person that's not privy to the information, not on resolution to receive the information, no single individual should be able to know exactly how much any one vendor or any one merchant actually generates or does in taxable sales, thereby sales tax revenue. What revenue and taxation law requires us to do is kind of combine information together to where it is otherwise undistinguishable about any single business, their performance specifically. So when we write this letter, we are very sensitive to that to make sure that we don't expose any data. Revenue and taxation law does, however, if there was the ability to zoom in, or if you look at this newsletter online, I believe city staff does post it on the website, you'll see the top 25 sales tax producers in the city. It is only on the Bradley Burns side, right? Local vendors there, and it is listed in alphabetical order, which is again part of the requirement under revenue and taxation law. So this is a good source for Measure E's performance, Bradley Burns' performance. Also on the backside of this, we provide a statewide review of what happened during that quarter, just to kind of give added context about what we see going on in the economy. I would also say for the community and even community members, I'm sure you're quite comfortable doing, is reaching out to city staff for other economic updates. We communicate as frequently as needed with city staff. We do get questions at different times, and we're happy to respond and give updates as needed. So, yeah. That was all I had here for the presentation. You'll see the next slide is just for Q&A. I'm available for questions if you have any, and anything that I might not be able to answer tonight or this afternoon, I'd be happy to follow up with staff and provide that to the committee as needed.
Thank you. I'll start. I had a couple of questions. And one thing that we had asked Sarah to try to have you guys include in the presentation was a look back at your forecasting history and accuracy. So if you have projected the sales tax to be X or the tax coming in from this measure to be, X amount, how accurate was that, and what does that track record look like? And obviously, in 2020, there was a little bit of a blip in the first half of that year that made forecasting much of anything a challenge. Do you have any information off the cuff on that?
It's Sarah and I did talk about that, and trying to work that into the presentation was a bit challenging, only because we provide, especially back during the pandemic, through those periods of great uncertainty, we were providing updates on forecasts every quarter as we saw the economy continue to change and otherwise get better in this case, which is great. But it then becomes, well, how do we want to judge our performance, or how would others like to judge our performance given the dynamic changes in the economy? So let me just put out some numbers there. As you saw, or we can maybe go back on the slides to list both Bradley Burns and transactions tax. Measure E ended at 4.6 million. Back in May, we were really, really close. We gave the city a $4.6 million estimate for Measure E at that time. We had one more quarter to go, and we were pretty already on top of the economic trends. Flashing back a little bit further, in January, we had given the city a number of 4.3 million. That was right about the time when most agencies do their mid-year financial update, kind of look to see how the current fiscal year is trending. We were pretty close, obviously a little under, as we had underestimated the change on gas prices, which did inevitably jump up sales tax. But for the last 6 months of the fiscal year there, we were, I would say that we're pretty right on top of the trend. We do, so we could go back further, but then we get into those pandemic periods of great uncertainty. I would tell you that for the most part, we tend to, our whole team, the team that I lead of 12, we are all former government employees. We all have a sensitivity over how budgets are used and being able to forecast accurately, but then also lean a little bit on the side of conservative, just because we know what the financial commitments mean if we end up overestimating. So we tend to come in, or we will estimate a little bit less, is what our overall historical performance has shown us. We, as far as like a percentage, I can tell you our goal here post-pandemic is to get back to our historical norm of about plus or minus 2% for all of our clients. Sometimes we can't predict the economy, especially locally, when we see large jumps in one-time purchases. We've seen cities buy a fire truck right at the end of the fiscal year, and it causes sales tax to jump up. We might not have otherwise forecasted that. So it gets to be sensitive, but not something that we shy away from. Our commitment to everybody that we work for is we do our best to forecast, but if we are not as accurate as they would like, we can definitely go back through the data and determine exactly where we missed it, and kind of try to hold ourselves accountable to be able to explain where those pluses and minuses were, to then help our forecasting as we go forward. The economy is starting to slow down, which isn't the worst thing in the world. It is getting a little bit more predictable as we see it. We think we're going to be a lot better when we look retroactively at fiscal year 22-23, that which most agencies are starting right now, and get back into that 2% range. So there's a lot there, and some numbers that I threw around. I apologize. It just wasn't as easy for me to put that into a slide per se, because of the timing differences.
Thank you. A follow-up question on that is, for this number that we have in front of us here, this 4.672, how mature is that, and what kind of adjustments should we expect to continue to flow through?
So that represents the cash total that the city has received, and including the months that it'll accrue back on a financial basis, financial accounting basis. So that should be right at the number that shows on the city's annual financial report. It does include the, whoops, you know what? Let me make sure. I want to make sure it includes the CDTFA admin fee. I think that's the only piece that it may, well, CDTFA's admin fee was $9,700. So it's going to be right there at the 4.682 with the admin fee deducted. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I know, and maybe it's property taxes, or I know there's one of the taxes where there's a lot of times a lag, and so probably the sales tax is not as subject to that, but where there's, data that comes in after the fact and you're still getting true ups a year or 2 years later on a prior period.
Yeah, that, property tax does function that way. We are less sensitive to what the city will accrue. So kind of more of an accounting term there. City does take the last 2 months, July and August cash receipts, and accrue them back to the fiscal year. And it's just because of those periods also represent what was the April, May, June sales, actual sales activity. So they're required to accrue back, but it's not the same, 2 and 3 years down the road getting historical revenue. It's a little tighter.
All right, other committee members, questions, comments?
In addition to the online transactions that are accounted for in the state and county pools, are there any other types of transactions that are in that grouping?
There are, yes. It is, again, I didn't want to go too much into details and be heavy on the presentation, but the DMV is another contributor into the pool. Here, think private-to-private auto sales where there's no dealership involved. So somebody sells an automobile off the side of the road. The new buyer, the new owner goes to register it with the DMV, says, hey, I just bought this vehicle. The DMV will ask the sales price or assume a market sales price and then assess sales tax related to that. Because in that case, the way, much like out-of-state online retail or online sales, even though the DMV has a address on the Bradley-Burn side, the way that revenue and taxation law goes is it dumps into the countywide use tax pool. So along with out-of-state online retailers, that all goes into the pool as well. Every city gets a proportional share of the pool relative to the amount generated each quarter by local businesses. It's that of percentage of the entire county. That's the share of the county pool. But along with online retailers, DMV is another very large contributor into the county pool.
Thank you. Do all businesses, regardless of their size, remit quarterly?
So they're required to file the tax return quarterly. Many businesses will remit a financial payment monthly, and they, in which case, have set up payment schedules with CDTFA, or easy enough to state. So not everybody pays quarterly, but everybody is required to file the actual tax return that breaks down how much for that entire quarter was generated in each jurisdiction.
So in other words, the fourth quarter will have a true up of the other 3 quarters?
No, so every quarter is otherwise kind of trued up onto itself. So if there's 3 monthly payments within that quarter. So if a company is estimating its total quarterly tax, it'll pay an estimate in that first payment, that first monthly amount. It'll pay an estimate in the second monthly amount. Then the third and final quarterly payment, or the final payment for that quarter, they'll true it up. They'll look at what they already advanced against what total amount actually happened and what's due. And that's kind of the true up, or what we call a cleanup, to make sure that the total amount paid is exactly the amount that was otherwise generated.
If I buy something today, when will the city receive the money?
Let's see, we're in October right now. So if you buy something right now, it goes into the October, November, December sales tax period. The city will receive the cash for that period in January, February, and March. So kind of all as those 3 monthly payments, as I talked about, those monthly payments come to the city in that order.
Does the city benefit at all from the float the state has with that payment method?
Yeah, no, just because, as you can imagine, or as I talked about those timeframes, right? So the December, January, February, I think I got those right. I want to remember. So preceding November is kind of truing up and cleaning up the prior quarter, right? And then in March starts the payments for the next sales period. So there's a constant flow. The state has gotten much better at turning around the payments with their new online portal. It's called CROSS, C-O-S. And it's a lot more automated, and we've seen the improvements in efficiencies to not have such a lag in payments. But even that month to two, I don't really believe there is, because now CDTFA is remitting a lot of what they get as soon as they get it.
A previous finance director used to provide this committee and the city council with more details, a more detailed report from you folks than we've been receiving the last year. If I recall correctly, in addition to the Bradley Burns analysis, it also included detail of the district transaction tax, and it broke it down by industry group, and it also broke it down into the 4 business sections of the city. And there's some organizations here, one in specific that I could think of that would benefit from having that more detailed information. And I don't believe it's because it's all grouped together, it's confidential, and I was curious to find out why that's. Either you've not chosen to distribute it or the city has not chosen to distribute it.
So the newsletter, the non-confidential newsletter, is that which we provide to agencies to communicate out. If cities so desire to provide more information, we can definitely help with that. So I'm not quite sure what was being provided previously, but we're happy to help staff provide the committee and the community with additional information as needed. And let me just go ahead and real quick jump on the other piece of your question, which related to the 4 geo, we call them geo areas. Cities will kind of create some boundaries for different areas of their city to really break apart the revenue and check performance, like the Embarcadero area, right? So sensitive for the city. So we have those reports, but the data behind it, the details of exactly what came from which address, is only provided to us by CDTFA under Bradley Burns law. CDTFA does not provide us specific address details when it comes to Measure E data. And even though we might be able to correlate similar businesses within the geo areas, it becomes a bit laborious, and probably what we fear is that we would miss something because we would have to do it by hand because the data is not provided. The detailed address information is not provided to us under Measure E. So the only thing that we can provide our clients is the geo area details under Bradley Burns.
Well, even if you provided the data that's on the current slide that we're all looking at, and if you just provided the geographical breakdown for the Bradley Burns, which you say you already do, Steve, I'm really thinking of your organization, would really like, I think, to be able to track those sales by those 4 business districts. I think it'd be very helpful. And I hope the city would consider providing that information to both this group and also the city council and making it available on the city's website.
I think you're correct, Homer. I'm not quite sure whether it was 6 or 7 years ago, the city did an economic development strategy plan and divided the city up into their 4 MBs, as they called it. One was Quintana, one was sort of downtown, which include Morro Bay Boulevard and Main Street, North Morro Bay, and then the Embarcadero. And I think there's been an interest in our organization, the Chamber of Commerce, of just sort of checking in to see how they're doing compared to where they were a while ago. We always get lots of turnover, lots of questions about we're not doing as well as we could. In the last 2 years, actually, most retailers have done very well. Some say they've had their best years ever. But as we deal with how are they doing well or not as well, and as we look at things like trends on the harbor transactions, where is that going? Because I think we deal with sort of how does that affect harbor revenues? How does it affect, what does the city and the chamber need to do to correct what appears to be a situation of declining sales? I think so. That's the comparison. I don't know if you need it on an annual basis, but on a regular basis, we need to check in and say, are they doing as well as we thought they should be doing?
Well, they used to be just reported as part of the regular quarterly report that these folks would submit. And the other issue has always been of interest to the community is the relationship between the residents, the permanent residents, and the tourists in terms of their spending patterns. And this information, when you include both the Bradley Burns and the district transaction tax, would help people get a better understanding of the contribution tourists actually make.
So I'd be happy to work with staff on the request for additional information. We do also provide, from our economic development team, a resident versus non-resident type of report, which may be of interest, and feel free to communicate with staff and let, I'll keep it and follow up with staff as well to see if that's of interest for the community.
Thanks, noted, and I don't have the particulars. I know there's city attorneys looked into this very deeply, and so did Sarah, so something I'll have to go back and look into. Certainly presenting information by district sounds great, but it also sounds very confusing now that you can't do that for Measure E, so it's just something we need to think about, because it's already confusing enough as it is, explaining sales tax to our community. So I'll definitely want to take that under consideration.
Is that something that we might make a motion on to make it more formal or not?
No, there's, you know, again, you could probably do it as a future agenda item, but I think I have enough information to take it back and see what we can do and report out the next meeting.
Questions?
I only had one question for Bobby. This is very helpful for me. Because of the size of our community and the nature of the retailers we have, is this skew between the Bradley Burns and the Measure, is that typical of a city? In a larger city, for example, would you expect the skew to be 1.82 as opposed to the 1.5 ratio? How do we compare to other agencies that you see with sales tax measures and Bradley Burns?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and I would say we see this similar type of ratio happen in smaller cities. I think it's amplified here for Morro Bay because of kind of the tourism impact, goods coming from out of the area being delivered into the city, not having that dynamic of auto dealers, right? Bigger city is going to have its own auto dealerships. Its residents are going to buy from in-city dealerships and out-of-city dealerships, but inevitably it starts to balance out. So not having that component locally definitely creates this ratio. So I would think, I see this in smaller cities that do get that tourism bump, outside money coming in that definitely helps, amplify it. Plus, you have your local residents. I'll be considerate, but I think whether it be savvy or maybe even a touch if Morro Bay maybe is their second home, a little bit more maybe affluent, if you will, that's where we see I've seen those communities buy more automobiles than other kind of larger cities with a lot of local transportation, where its residents maybe don't have the ability to buy cars at the same pace or buy an upgrade on a vehicle. So it plays its way back into this ratio dynamic that we see.
I have two other questions on the information that you use for forecasting. So one is with developments that are happening in the city. So for example, if a new hotel is being built, how is that information communicated to your team so that you understand if there's something material to be incorporating in a future forecast? And then the second question is on more the broader economic indicators. How do you factor in things that are happening more broadly in the economy, and which of these sections you expect to be increasing or decreasing based on economic data?
Sure. So the first part of that on the new development, any potential new development coming into the city, we meet every quarter with city staff. I know myself, I've been lucky enough to travel both for vacations and for work into the area and be able to meet with staff, whether it be on the economic development side, city management, city finance staff. We've all met before, and it's in those quarterly meetings when we go over a lot of the same information that we just talked about in more detail because of the confidentiality of it. But it's in those meetings where the conversations start to come about. Hey, we've got a project that just hit the desk. The plans have been submitted. We're working through it right now. Here's what it potentially looks like. Is there a sales tax component with a new hotel? Not a direct sales tax component. There's the indirect, right? Because anybody who travels into the area is likely to then spend locally. So that gives us reassurance, especially when we're doing the forecast, that okay, there's going to be people more, the ability for tourism, ability for people to stay local and spend local with something like a new hotel. So every quarter, so every 3 months or so is about the frequency that we meet with staff and have the potential to talk about new businesses. Plus, we're available via email. If I get this quite a bit, a client will email and say, hey, we've got a new Home Depot opening. What's it going to generate for us? Obviously, we have a lot of data and details. We can break that down and pretty much tell them exactly when the doors open, here's what you can expect for going forward. So we've got a lot of tangible data to facilitate those conversations and figure out the dollars, the potential dollar impact. On the economic trend side, so we get this statewide data every quarter. We also, on our website, hdlcompanies.com, every quarter we'll do a webinar that is open and available for all of our clients. We then subsequently post it on our website. So if you go there, you'll see historical webinars that we've done. It's about an hour's worth of time where we go through on a statewide basis the trends that are happening within these major industry groups. So we always break it down into some of the details of what's going on with autos versus gas versus restaurants, which has been a very dynamic change most recently. Doing that at the very start of the quarter when we get new data then allows us, whenever we're doing forecasting, to apply some of those bigger trends back down to the local levels. So when we do a forecast, when I've personally done historical forecasts for Morro Bay, is I consider what's the trend on tourism look like. As I've talked to other agencies, as you might appreciate, we have a lot of folks in the Central Coast as clients, and so we talk to all of them. We get that vibe for, hey, what's tourism sounding like, whether it be from the Conference and Visitors Bureau, from hotels. And if Pismo is communicating that they're expecting to have a whirlwind summer, I can then kind of extrapolate that up and down the coast to go, okay, how would something like that affect the folks in, or the city of Morro Bay? Are they going to get a heavy tourism, especially out of the Central Valley? Even though gas prices were higher, this is a trend most recently that we had seen. Even though gas prices were high, we still heard that travelers were not going to be getting on airplanes because the cost to fly was that much higher. They were going to stay local, keep their dollars here, probably head to the coast, and then otherwise expect heavy tourism there locally. So when we're doing forecasts, we're able to build that in specifically for the Bradley Burns component of Morro Bay, plus also apply kind of our bigger trends on online retail. Back in March timeframe, we had suspected, because of how heavy shopping and online sales activity was during 2021, post-pandemic, people had a lot of money, spent it, but they bought online rather than in stores. Now here in 22, back in March, Amazon started giving Wall Street some clues that, okay, growth was not going to be very strong, if at all, probably see some decreases. We saw that in the data, and now we can apply that first off to the pools, because again, online retailers allocate into the pool. How's that going to affect the city's Bradley Burns portion of the pool? Then also on Measure E, how is it going to affect the general consumer good category on that side of it when we're doing a forecast? So we, having so many clients statewide, getting so much of the statewide data, looking at trends in our team of 12, we all put our heads together. We're all watching the economy pretty much every day. We're able to, at any point, apply that locally and hopefully get the number right. As I said, we do tend to lean on the conservative side on those estimates, but sometimes we're using the best information that we have available at that moment in time, knowing that there might still be a couple periods to come in the fiscal year.
Absolutely.
One more question. Over the past 2 or 3 years, I know a lot of our local retailers have acquired an online presence or expanded their online presence as well as their brick and mortar presence. How are those transactions handled? Are they handled the same as Amazon or Wayfair? They go into a county pool? How does that dollar or that sales tax dollar get divided?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it unfortunately is a bit of a gray area, and I say that because it gets very technical and in the weeds of revenue and taxation law. It's not normally the same as Amazon and Wayfair and others. And the main reason is, and especially appreciating, I've shopped there locally at the Embarcadero. My family, my 2 kids and I, with my wife, we have fond memories of being there. They are likely taking their goods right off the shelf of their store and shipping it out. If it goes out of state, there's no California sales tax applied, because it would apply otherwise to the state it was shipping to. But let's just, for ease of this example, let's say it's a California resident. When the goods are pulled off the shelf and shipped out to that resident, the local Bradley Burns would be reported by that business in Morro Bay, and the sales tax dollars will get allocated likely to Morro Bay, because that's where the goods were at the time the customer bought them. Okay. Now, the customer might live in a different jurisdiction, let's say down here in LA, where they've got a 10% sales tax rate. They're going to pay 10%, but the local Bradley Burns will stay there in Morro Bay. There would not be any Measure E collected because, again, those goods were shipped out of the city. All the extra transactions taxes from LA would apply, but that consumer would pay for those or pay the tax on those. So it's because for the local businesses there, if they're pulling the goods right off the shelf, it's probably still benefiting the city of Morro Bay because they're likely remitting the local Bradley Burns when they're making California sales to Morro Bay.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I just have a comment. I don't know if it's appropriate, but are we going to address Ms. Winholtz's email?
It's not on the agenda, so I don't know that we need to.
Excuse me, Mr. Collins, what does
Yeah,
that mean?
I'm saying it's up to you if you want us to respond to it, although I didn't see it myself.
We can forward it, and you can do that separately.
Sure.
Okay. It was just a question about the way the purpose of the sales tax was, or the Measure E was worded.
Well, I agreed with her on the first part and totally disagreed with her on the second part.
All right. Well, thanks, Bobby. This was really very helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you, committee members, for your time. And if you have any further questions, feel free to funnel those back. I'll be happy to work with city staff to get you any information you need.
Great. Okay, next on our agenda is future agenda items.
Our next meeting is scheduled for January 17th, and we, at that time, will give the annual report for Measure E20 for fiscal year 21-22.
And will the audit results be available at that time? Will there be a briefing at that time, or would it be the following meeting?
Let's say the following meeting, that's the goal, but I don't want to agendize that in case we don't make that cutoff.
Okay. Any other recommendations for future agenda items? Okay. And we've talked about the next meeting, January 17th, and otherwise ready for adjournment if there's not any other comment. Okay,
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
thank you.